Hi, my name is Dr. Ryan Bryant. I'm UPL's Technical Services Manager for Oklahoma, Texas, Kansas, and Colorado. I want to thank you for attending our Sorghum Frontiers virtual field day. I'm here today to talk to you about IMIFLEX. As many of you may already know, IMIFLEX will be the registered companion product for use within the iGrowth weed control system. Now, it should be noted, IMIFLEX is still pending EPA registration. However, we do expect that registration in time for the 2021 growing season. Before we get started, I'd like to give you some brief technical information as it relates to IMIFLEX. So within IMIFLEX, our active ingredient is imazamox. Imazamox is a group 2 herbicide, also known as an ALS inhibitor. How ALS inhibitors work is by inhibiting the biosynthesis of branched chain amino acids. What this ultimately leads to is the plant's inability to have the building blocks it needs to produce the necessary proteins it utilizes for its primary metabolic functions. The type of activity that you see from imazamox is broad spectrum residual control over a list of troublesome broadleaf and grass weeds. This can be applied in both a pre or post application timing. From our research trials over various geographies across many years, we have seen a collective average in terms of plant injury of less than 0.05% when imazamox is applied pre or post to iGrowth hybrids. So we have an excellent degree of crop safety within this system. As many of you may be familiar, weed control is critical for profitable production in any system. What's been lacking in grain sorghum until this point is the ability for any sort of herbicide tolerance within these systems to be utilized in control of some of these most troublesome weeds. The impact that broadleaf weeds have is without a doubt very important. However, what's received limited attention until this point is our ability to control grasses. Grass pressure within grain sorghum has continually plagued producers as there have been very limited options in terms of effective weed control. What we get with the iGrowth system is the ability to apply imazamox pre or post and get control of some of these most troublesome weeds that have continually plagued grain sorghum production. Focusing in on grass control, a recent investigation was conducted to quantify the actual percentage of yield reduction that you can expect from grassy weeds when they go uncontrolled. The study keyed in on some key grassy weeds that grain sorghum producers often experience. To name a few, it included prairie cupgrass, barnyard grass, green and yellow foxtail, as well as field sandbur. Now, when these weed species go uncontrolled, you can expect to see yield losses that range from 40 to 42%. The upper end of this spectrum looked at weeds such as shattercane and Texas panicum. Now, with these weed species, they are notorious yield robbers within grain sorghum systems. And what this study found was that these two weed species can regularly reduce yield potential by upwards of 80% when left uncontrolled. Many of you are familiar with the detrimental impact that pigweeds can have on any sort of production system, especially within the United States and when we get into Kansas and the Oklahoma and Texas panhandles. The type of activity that you can see from imazamox is broad spectrum, so we do expect to see activity on these types of weed species. When it comes to our broadleaf weeds, keying in more so on Palmer amaranth or other pigweeds, it has been documented in a study in the early 2000s that a single pigweed plant can reduce yield potential by 3.5% in the area where it's actively growing and competing with the sorghum crop. Now, you can imagine what this type of yield loss from a single plant can do when it's extrapolated out to an entire field and a large-scale infestation of pigweeds that have gone uncontrolled. Now, the issues that we have, not only with broadleaves, but especially when you consider the lack of control options we have for grasses, it is what's gotten us so excited by the data we've been able to generate from evaluating IMIFLEX within the iGrowth system over the last several years. It's through these research trials that it's allowed us to identify what will ultimately be our herbicide program recommendations for the use of IMIFLEX within the iGrowth system upon receiving our EPA registration for IMIFLEX. Now, what our research trials have shown us is that the use of a tank mix partner with IMIFLEX is necessary, whether that's from a pre or post standpoint. Additionally, what we have seen from our research trials is that there's an interaction between tank mix partner of choice and the targeted weed species that we're looking to control. When it comes to broadleaf weeds, our data shows us that tank mixing IMIFLEX with a product such as atrazine or a mesotrione containing product like Motif, we get grid control on our broadleaf weeds from a pre-application. Alternatively, when we look to control grasses, our data shows us that mixing IMIFLEX with a group 15 chemistry such as S-metolachlor or Moccasin 2+ allows us to have the optimum level of control of these grassy weeds. What this data shows us is that by having a combination of multiple active ingredients in the tank with IMIFLEX allows for the best broad spectrum control of both grasses and broadleaves. What our data shows is that by having IMIFLEX in the tank with something like a Motif or a mesotrione, in addition to an S-metolachlor containing product like Moccasin 2+, we get the best activity on both grasses and broadleaves and are able to maintain that residual control into canopy closure. This treatment that I want to share with you today has been a consistent performer across multiple locations and multiple years in terms of weed control using the iGrowth technology and companion product IMIFLEX. This treatment I have in front of us is where IMIFLEX was tank mixed with S-metolachlor or Moccasin 2 Plus for a pre-emergent program and was followed by a post-application of atrazine. What our data has consistently shown us is that this type of program gives us an excellent advantage in controlling grassy weed pressure. What this type of control leads to is a 20 to 30% reduction in weed population and weed density that directly compete with your sorghum crop. When it comes to grain sorghum production, our first 30 to 40 days are going to be critical in terms of weed control. It's during this early period that a lot of our yield potential is determined, and any excessive competition from weeds during this period will negatively impact our yield potential. When it comes to the use of IMIFLEX as a post-treatment, planning is critical. Our research trials continue to show us that the need for a solid foundation from a pre-emergent program is critical. In addition to that, what our trials continue to document is the need for a tank mix partner with IMIFLEX, such as atrazine. Now, when we make that application, what we continue to see from our trials is the need to target small, actively growing weeds and bridge our residuals. This next plot that I want to showcase to you is another that has been a consistent performer across our different research trials we've looked at the last several years. In this plot specifically, we used IMIFLEX and atrazine pre and followed that up by a post program of a traditional broadleaf situation. Now, with this type of a tank mix, our data shows us that a focus on broadleaves is where we're going to see our best control when we combine IMIFLEX with atrazine. And as you go down the row, you can see the level of control that we were able to achieve with this program in terms of pigweeds. With this type of program, we're able to see control that is equal, if not better, than what we traditionally see from a broadleaf control standpoint. So to branch off of what I just discussed with IMIFLEX and atrazine, we're incredibly excited by what our data is showing us by the tank mix capabilities we see from IMIFLEX and atrazine when it comes to pigweed control. On my left, we have where IMIFLEX and atrazine was used pre, followed by our broadleaf program. Then on the right, we can see what happens when broadleaf weeds such as pigweeds go uncontrolled. The major effect you're going to see from two differences like this is how critical it is to get early control of your weeds, whether that's from a pre-emergent standpoint or an early post. What's most critical is that our data shows IMIFLEX cannot be used as a rescue treatment. The major impact that we see from a lack of control of weeds early on is a substantial difference in both maturity and final grain yield. What I'd like to highlight to you now is the difference you see in grain sorghum development versus when weeds go controlled and when they go uncontrolled. What you can see from the impact of the weeds on the right is a significant difference in the development of this plant, ultimately leading to a reduced yield potential. Now what we have here is where the weeds were controlled early on, and you can see the difference it makes versus when we don't control weeds and when we do control the weeds. What's most important for this type of system is that we get control of these weeds early on, whether that's from a pre or post application. Early control is critical. The final plot that I want to share with you today is one where we have 4 modes of action actively working against some of our most troublesome broadleaf and grassy weeds. Across our research trials the last several years, this herbicide program has been one of the most consistent in helping to maintain clean fields up to canopy closure. The 4 modes of action that we have in this plot feature atrazine, mesotrione, S-metolachlor, and IMIFLEX. Now, data from these plots have shown that we're able to maintain control over broadleaf and grass weeds up to canopy closure. As we go down the row, we can see the effect that this type of a program has in maintaining clean fields as we go into the reproductive stages of development. Ultimately, what has us so excited is the flexibility that IMIFLEX will offer producers in terms of additional options for weed control in their production systems. As we receive our EPA registration for IMIFLEX, we look forward to the opportunities that it can award you on your sorghum acres.